Will be just a minute. We're waiting for just a few people here still. What? Oh, waiting for the word. It seems like old times, Janine. Are we ready to start? Thank you. We would like to welcome you to the Provo Municipal Council meeting. It is 5:40 on Tuesday, September 11th. We are convened in the City Center Municipal Council chambers. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, Provo City Council, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. The council requests that citizens help maintain the decorum of the meeting by turning off electronic devices, being respectful to council and others, and refraining from applauding during the proceedings of this meeting. We'll begin with the roll call.
Cliff Strachan,
Brian Jones,
George Handley,
Kay Van Buren,
Dave Connect,
Gary Winterton.
David Harding,
Dave Sewell,
Mayor Kafusti,
Wayne Parker.
And George Stewart is close by, I'm sure. He was here just a minute ago, but we'll look for him. And we'll have an opening prayer by Hannah Harding, and then we will turn the time over to Chief Miguel. Hannah, thank you.
That we can be here today at the city meeting and that we have the opportunity to live in the city that we do. And we ask you to bless us at this meeting, that we may remain civil and listen to others' ideas and be open, and that that those on the council may make smart decisions. And we love you and say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, will you please rise for the presentation of the colors of the United States of America by the joint Provo Police, Provo Fire Honor Guard. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated.
We appreciate today, especially on September 11th, the first responders that we have here in Provo and throughout our country. We're grateful for them. We're grateful for your willingness to be here today and to participate with us. Please never forget this day on 9/11. We would like to now have a presentation introducing our Provo Youth City Council, and Caleb Dewey will come forward and do that.
Hello everyone, I am Caleb Dewey. I'm part of the Provo Youth City Council, and we were organized back in May, and we've made plenty of progress since then. Could you go to the next slide? We decided to model ourselves after the council as much as we could by having a chairman and then a vice chairman, and then we also organized with multiple other jobs that we found necessary as time went on, and then we assigned people to those jobs when we felt like it was necessary. Can you go to the next slide? And then we decided to create a mission statement, because a mission statement is super important to us so that we can have a clearly defined direction that we want to bring everyone and something that we want to clearly do. So we, as a council, got together and found some core values that we liked, and then we went through several drafts of mission statements, found the things that we liked the most, and created a mission statement based off of that. So our mission statement is up here. The mission of the Provo Youth City Council is to unite our community by encouraging participation in service and to teach youth to become responsible and engaged citizens. And our core values are above that: service, unity, and community. Next slide. So the very first service project that we had organized was helping out with the rooftop concerts. The rooftop concerts, I'm sure many of you have been to. They're an excellent opportunity to enjoy the culture here in Provo and be able to go to a free concert. And so we first helped put up posters for that event around Provo, and then on the night of, we came and helped clean up a little bit. Next slide. The next activity that we did was have a member of the school board come and talk to us about what he does and why he wants to do what he does. And we asked him questions, and we learned a lot about the process that the school board goes through when they want to make changes and what things they have done recently. Next slide. Oh, okay. So one other thing that we have planned that we have not yet started on is the idea was proposed to go through the documents that, or many documents or announcements or anything else in the city that are not always translated into Spanish despite the large Spanish-speaking community. And that was one idea for a service project we had. So we have other ideas for service projects in the making, and we're doing our best to get those ready, and we're really excited. So thank you for your time, and thank you for allowing us to introduce ourselves, and that's all.
Before you go, we would like to introduce the council, the youth council. If they come up, I don't know if I would invite you to come up and introduce yourselves.
Mr.
Tell
Chair,
us which, yes.
once they've introduced themselves, might the council entertain a photo with the youth council?
We'd be glad to. And tell us which school you're from.
I'm Stella Clark. I'm from Tippview High School.
Have them come to the
Stella Clark, Timothy High School.
I'm Hannah Harding and from Provo High.
I'm Lily Jensen. I'm from Timothy High School.
I'm Mylena Lugo from Provo High.
I'm Eliana Palacios from Provo High.
I'm Christina Coca from Timothy High School.
I'm Caden Staley from Timothy High School.
And where's Helen Patterson? And Helen is leading the group. She's the adult leader with them. They have recruited young people from all of the public and charter high schools in the city and some of the middle schools. And Helen's plan has been to create some staggering in there, so we'll have some older kids and some younger kids. We'll be developing the next round of leaders as we go forward. And thank you guys for all your service you're doing and that you'll continue to do. We're proud of you.
Thank you.
Council's going to come down and get a picture with you. You all want to stand up here? Helen, you better join them. Madam Mayor? Smile because this is going on Twitter. Okay, hopefully one of those was good.
Judge Romney, we welcome you to our council chambers today, and we invite you to come forward and give us the presentation on the justice courts.
Thank you so much, all of you, for the opportunity to be here and report on the Provo City Justice Court. I'm privileged to be here with Rhianna Newton, our exceptional court administrator. We're grateful also for John Borgett and his being here and the help and support that he gives to our justice court. We work hard to fulfill the motto of the justice courts and statewide, which is to improve the quality of life in our community. We're very pleased to report the results of our annual customer service survey. Over several weeks this summer, we took the pulse, if you will, of the customers that we have in court by administering a survey to 205 court customers, and we're very pleased in the way that they rated our service to the public. As you'd expect, most people who come to court aren't happy to be there. They may be dealing with a criminal case, an arraignment, a pretrial, a trial, or a sentencing hearing. They may be handling a traffic case, or paying a fine, or speaking to a front counter clerk. As you can imagine, they're stressful situations, but despite their circumstances, the customer survey responses have been very complimentary, very positive, and our customers are pretty much satisfied with their customer service. If we can you can show the first slide there. There we go. Thank you. And it's not real large, but you will see what the questions we ask, and we rate the answers. The way we score this is sort of like a grade point average. The least positive response is scored as a 1. The most positive response is scored as a 4. And then we calculate the responses to the average, we calculate the average responses to each question. Like a grade point average, a perfect score would be 4.0. So you can see that those questions that are asked: what's the reason for your visit to the court? How do you feel about the time it took to conclude your business? Were you treated with courtesy and respect by the staff? How satisfied are you with your overall customer service experience? And then if you had a hearing before the judge, please answer these questions. I feel that my case was handled fairly. I was given an opportunity to be heard and ask questions. Were you advised of your right to be represented by an attorney? If you were appointed a public defender, are you satisfied with his or her representation? If you represented yourself, do you feel that the prosecutor handled your case professionally? And as you leave the court, do you understand what happened in your case? So to these questions, and to a number of these questions, we received the following responses. To the question of, and if we can go to the next slide, please. I think it's in there. There we go. Thank you. In any event, while they're pulling it up, let me tell you the responses. As to the question, how do you feel about the time it took to conclude your business? The average was 3.56 compared to last year, and there's an 8% increase over last year's survey. The question, were you treated with courtesy and respect by the staff that you interacted with, resulted in an average of 3.75, which is a 3% positive increase. The question, how satisfied are you with your overall customer service experience, showed an average response of 3.71, an 8% increase from last year. The question, do you feel your case was handled fairly? The average response was 3.67, a 6% increase. And the question, were you given an opportunity to be heard and ask questions? The average was 3.63, a positive increase of 6% from last year's survey. So totaled up, the average of all the responses to all the questions on our survey was an amazing 3.67. I think I'd be happy with that grade point average. We are happy with these results, which show that our court customers at the Provo City Justice Court receive excellent service and are very satisfied with how they are treated at court. So we wanted to report that to you. Justice courts in the state of Utah are established by cities and by counties, rather, and municipalities, and have the authority to handle Class B and C misdemeanor cases, violation of ordinances, small claims cases, infractions committed within their territorial jurisdiction. The jurisdiction of our court is the municipal city limits of Provo. Justice court judges are appointed by the executive, in our case the mayor, in a city court, and by the county commission in a county court. After appointment, the judges serve for 6 years and stand for retention elections at the end of the 6 years. 108 justice court judges serve in 134 county and municipal courts in the state of Utah. You may be interested in knowing some of the statistics as to justice courts. In the fiscal year 2018, which just concluded this summer, there were 439,358 cases filed in Utah's justice courts. Of these, 70,651 were criminal cases, 25,943 were small claims cases, and 342,854 were traffic cases. Typically, justice courts in the state of Utah handle almost 2/3 of all the court cases that there are in Utah annually. And then breaking it down further, bringing it closer, in fiscal 2018 in the Provo City Justice Court, there were 10,882 cases filed. Of those, 2,001 were criminal cases, 1,684 were small claims cases, and 7,197 were traffic cases. Now, a little bit of history, if I may. Most of us in the United States expect judges to wear a robe during criminal proceeding, or during court proceedings, rather, when the judge is seated behind the bench. But most of us don't think about how that robe became traditional and standard wear for those who preside over cases. The tradition began about 700 years ago in England during the reign of Edward II, who ruled from 1327 until 1377. At that time, the robes had already been standard dress for academics for about 100 years. The standard robes for judges in those days came in 3 colors: violet for the summer, green for the winter, and scarlet for special occasions. Often the material for these robes were given to the judge by the monarch. Green robes were last mentioned in 1354, and in 1635 guidelines were given as to which robes could be worn at certain times. The guidelines suggested that judges wear black robes with fur trim during the winter, I suppose for warmth, and violet or scarlet robes during the summer. Historians believe that the tradition of wearing only black robes may have begun during the second half of the 1600s. A popular theory ties the wearing of black robes to the mourning period associated with the death of the monarch. Some point to this time as being after the death of King Charles II in 1685, while others point to the time of being after the death of Queen Mary in 1694. When judges in the American colonies presided over legal proceedings, whether civil or criminal cases, they carried over the English tradition of wearing robes. At the time that the colonists won the Revolutionary War and established their own government, there was some argument between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. They debated this tradition. Adams was a lawyer, and he wanted the judges to continue to wear wigs and robes. And Jefferson thought they should distinguish themselves from the English system and just wear suits. A compromise was reached in which the American judges would wear the robe and not the wig. Thankfully for that, although maybe I could use a wig. Today, judges wear simple black robes, which are often very similar. Thank you. There is symbolism in this tradition, which shows that all judges are engaged in upholding the Constitution and the rule of law. The wearing of judicial robes is a tradition that goes back for 700 years. The judge's robe distinguishes him or her from everyone else in the courtroom and is a mark of authority. Some years ago, and if you can see this picture here, then-serving Chief Justice of the United States, Chief Justice Rehnquist, added gold stripes to the arms of his robe. The story is that he surprised his colleagues with this change and explained it that he had seen a Gilbert and Sullivan opera in which the Lord Chief Justice wore a robe with gold stripes. He thought it was a good idea, and he decided to add them to his robe, so he did, and hence the picture that you see there. Sandra Day O'Connor, who is a former Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, said her favorite thoughts about the robe had to do with the tradition of the Supreme Court of putting it on. On days when the court heard oral arguments, a buzzer sounds about 5 minutes before the judges are to take the bench. The judges go to the robing room, which is the judicial equivalent of a locker room. Each justice has a locker there, and attendants help the justices fashion their robes. Then each justice shakes the hand of every other justice before walking into the courtroom in a show of collegiality. Much work has been done in the last several years in Utah to bring more information to the judges in relation to their pretrial decisions as to whether and under what conditions to release criminal defendants from custody. Judges now have an assessment report that gives them critical facts about a defendant's criminal history, which facts in the past have not been accessible to judges. This information, this criminal history and other information, includes the defendant's history of past arrests, convictions for violent crimes, and instances of failure to appear in court. I have found this information most useful in helping me make these sort of release decisions and in imposing conditions on defendants which they must meet if they are released. We are pleased in the Provo City Justice Court with our mental health court, a problem-solving court which has been ongoing since our court was formed in 2007. It's been effective in reducing repeat offenses for those in the program and in holding them, the nonviolent defendants with mental illness, accountable and reducing the number of days in which they spend in jail. We're also pleased with our dedicated domestic violence calendar, which is heard each Wednesday morning. The calendar helps facilitate resolution of these cases, which can cause such devastation in families. We continue in our court with our collaborative effort with BYU and UVU in having law and college students serve as interns in our court with the potential to earn college credit for the work they do. They assist in ensuring that defendants listen to constitutional rights video, read their constitutional rights forms, ensuring that they make contact with their attorneys, and managing the case flow to be as smooth as possible in the courtroom. In the context of small claims cases, these students can serve as mediators, helping the litigants resolve their cases in a mutually acceptable manner, or at least to identify the issues in the cases which do not resolve. This gives the parties a realistic picture of the strength and the weaknesses of their various cases. A new rule was enacted this year, establishing the position of presiding judge of the justice courts in each judicial district. This judge is charged with the responsibility for the effective operation of the justice courts, within the district. He or she is responsible for the implementation and enforcement of statutes, rules, policies, and directives of the Judicial Council and Board of Justice Court judges as they pertain to the administration of our district, of our justice courts. At our annual training this last April, I was elected as the presiding judge of the 4th Judicial District. I was elected as the presiding 4th Judicial District Justice Court judge. I also serve as the Education Committee Chairman for our district and on the Trust and Confidence Committee for the Justice Courts. It's a privilege for me to associate with my peers, my fellow judges, to see the good work they do and to know of their dedication to following the law and in treating participants fairly. In this light, even though few people who come to court are happy to be there or want to be there, and many of those who come to court are disappointed in the ultimate result, a huge majority of those participants recognize that they have been treated with respect and fairness. I close with the words of Chief Justice Matthew Durant, Utah Chief Justice, in his 2018 State of the Judiciary address. As the judicial branch, it is our specific role to administer justice, but it is not one for which we have the exclusive right or responsibility. Justice is revered by all the public servants who labor in this capital. No one should wander these halls without stumbling upon sincere efforts to administer justice. This is our shared responsibility. We are proud to be part of a government where justice is not hidden away, but is a bright beacon that guides all that we do as public servants. We each serve different roles in this grand enterprise of government, but we share the same objective, and we are all dedicated to upholding that majestic principle that has made America a shining city on a hill, the rule of law. We are a government not of men or of women, but of law. We as public servants come and go, but the law remains. Thank you very much for your support of our Provo City Justice Court. I am honored to serve there with such dedicated people who seek to be fair and administer justice. Do you have any questions that I could answer?
Just wanted to say, Judge, I'm grateful that we have a Provo City Justice Court. There's a different feeling going into a court that is run by Provo City than maybe some other government agency. I'm grateful for the spirit that we find there, and you're right, it's not a happy place to be, and it's an important service that's given to our city. So I thank you very much for all you do and your staff.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. Appreciate the opportunity again to be here tonight.
Thank you. We will now move on to the public comment period of our council meeting. And Mr. Jones, will you introduce this for us?
I'd be happy to. As indicated on the screen, a required public hearing will be held for certain agenda items prior to council action. After each such item has been presented, time to comment will be provided for all those who wish to speak. For items that do not require a public hearing, public comment will still be taken following presentation of the item, but will be limited to 10 minutes. At this time, 15 minutes have been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow comment on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Persons who speak during this time to an item that is on the agenda will not normally be afforded a second opportunity to speak during the comment period specific to that item. During any public comment period, each speaker will generally be limited to 2 minutes. Additional time may be given to individuals specifically invited to speak, such as applicants, neighborhood chairs, or others that may be representing additional persons. Please begin your comments by stating your name and city of residence. Due to noticing requirements, no formal action will be taken in this meeting on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Those with comments are invited to approach the podium at this time.
For your information, it's important you recognize that 7 has been continued. It will not be brought up if you came to address anything regarding that item. Now would be the appropriate time to come up rather than, because it will not be introduced later. Okay, seeing no public comment, we will move on to item number 3, a public hearing regarding the proposed expansion of the Pleasant View permit parking program. And the neighborhood chair, Paul Evans. We will allow him to introduce this.
Thank you. I'm Paul Evans. I live in Provo. And you've received the packet with a request to expand the current permit parking program that we have in the Pleasant View neighborhood. It's the first established in 2004. It's been running for 14 years, and we just need to include a few more streets as those streets have been impacted in part by we used to have red curb restriction. Now without the red curb enforcement, we need the erection of signs to help control the parking in there. Much of it is related to BYU-related parking, and we just need to have some alleviation from those efforts. There are 11 homes that are included in this expansion on 650 East, and those are shown up on the slide as the dotted lines, 650 East and Andrus Lane, and the dark blue lines represent the areas where we have a current permit parking program. That program has been so successful that in the previous administration, they'd forgotten how it even got there, or it was even there, and we had to go back and remind them because it operates so well without any sort of impact on the residents themselves and also in terms of city resources. So we're just asking for the council to instruct or to move this item forward to Provo City staff so that a program can be put together and come back to you at a future point for your consideration for implementation. Any questions?
So just for the education of those who may not know the particular terms or how your permit program works, because they do vary from neighborhood to neighborhood, how are the terms, the hours, and let's say you have a visitor come to your house, how do you handle that?
Sure. So it's a restricted to 2-hour parking from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., Monday through Friday. Again, the intent is not to make it a residents-only parking area, but rather it's meant to reduce the likelihood that commuters would use the neighborhood as a parking lot. And so when there is a permit that can be acquired, and that can be shared with any vehicle comes in. However, we found that the signs alone have been sufficient to restrict any sort of people who come and park. And I think in 14 years, there's only been one citation issued for a violation in there. So, so the signs have been sufficient. And so we've even asked the parking enforcement, please do not come patrol. And so now it's announced to everybody that it's not patrolled. But anyway, but the issue is to say it shouldn't be a program that's a burden on the residents. And the burden is getting a permit, finding it, sticking out on the car, and everything else. And it's like that puts all the burden on the homeowners and the residents, in many cases renters. And so this way, we put most of the burden on with the signs, and that has worked really quite well.
Just a follow-up.
Sure.
So as I understand it, with the new Provo 360, we're going to hopefully implement a program where if you do need a permit, if you need a visitor permit, that you'll be able to go online and probably be license plate based, but it would be something that you can do easily at a moment's notice if someone shows up and you say, oh, hey, I'll just go in on my computer and I'll take care of it for you.
And remember, it's a 2-hour. So again, it's not an absolute restriction. We're just saying, look, if you're in the area and you're hanging out, fine. But if you're going to park here all day, no, go somewhere else. And that's really what the intent of the program is meant to do, is help incentivize that sort of behavior.
George?
I don't know if it was wise to have said publicly that you've only had one citation in 14 years.
Well, if anybody wants to change the statistics, they can.
No, I'm just teasing you.
Yeah.
The good news is that BYU students probably aren't watching this public hearing, so.
Well, the one thing that, you know, we have as a neighborhood, a little printed piece of paper that has the information about the ordinance, about what the restrictions are, and a phone number that they can call at Provo City to get more information about the permit parking program. And if there are vehicles that persistently violate the permit parking, we put those little note on the car inviting them to get more information and to avoid getting a ticket. And usually by the second such notice, they don't come back. So, because they realize that it is a permit parking program.
Great.
That's there, so.
I know that we'll be looking in the future to see, I've seen parking permit programs where we limit parking in one area, which then creates, they don't park there, they move to another spot. And I know we'll be doing a study on this if we decide to move this forward, and do you see any of that happening?
Yeah, we've actually have the data on that for the last 4 months. And even when the permit parking program was put into place 14 years ago, we had the data collected on the cars that were there, how frequently, how often. You know, we have the full studies on that. And in this case, what's happened is that people who are not parking on Lambert or 500 East, those are the blue lines on the map, they've now started to park closer to their place of employment at BYU, and that's been kind of where the new pressure has come in for 650 East and Andrus Lane. There is no other place to park. Of course, across the street to the south is the BYU Marriott Center parking lot, which has open slots in there every day. Also with UVX, it's possible now for people to park down by the stadium and then hop on the UVX bus. And it'll take them up the road and they can park at the stadium for free. So
with that in mind, why do a program? If they can park at the Marriott Center and they can do it in the UVX, is it necessary?
Right, so UVX began operation on August 13th, and since that time, there's been no change in the vehicles who are parking in the neighborhood.
And who are those vehicles? Are they
They're
students?
They're BYU employees.
Why don't
most
they
of them are
park in the
students.
Marriott Center?
That would be a really good question to ask them. We've avoided, asking people, why are you parking here? We just observe and say, this is the behavior that we're seeing, and it hasn't changed, so.
Any other questions for Paul? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. This item is open for a public hearing, and we'd invite those that would be interested in speaking to this item to come forward. Seeing no one coming forward at this point, we will bring it back to the council. And that leaves two options for the council at this point: to direct that a study of the proposed parking area be undertaken, or to deny the application on the grounds that there is not enough public support. Paul, I'm going to call you back up here in a minute. Will you tell us about public support? Nobody came. Nobody wanted to comment, I guess.
Being here and wanting to stand up are two different things, perhaps. But again, there's 11 residences that are impacted by this permit parking program. And the discussion began among residents, particularly along 650 East, starting in June. Hey, we've got all these cars that are parking here. How can we control them? We started collecting the data on it. And so each of the residents that will be impacted by this program have signed the petition, and that's what you see on the yellow sheet here. So it's 100% support. And again, we just compare it to what we have on 500 East and on Lambert Lane, where again, We have unanimous support for the program on there. You know, there's no residents who are complaining about it being overburdened. It takes care of the problem. It mitigates the parking demand. And for the city's investment, it just requires the installment of signs. And then it pretty much runs on its own after that. And so it's really what we're saying is we lost the red curb, which took care of things before, so we need something like that going forward. There's no parking restrictions on Saturday or Sunday or in evenings, so we acutely experience the BYU sports and other events nearby, but that's just part of living here.
BYU students have to pay $60 a semester to park on campus. That's a lot of money when you're a BYU student.
Exactly, to park in the Y lot, but you can park down at the stadium for free.
But in response to, you know, why does anyone choose to park there and then walk across the street? Because it's so much more convenient. I think that's the answer right there.
We could suppose a number of different reasons. Shade, I got really good shade.
There you
So,
go.
you know, there's apples and grapes and plums along the way that you can grab too. So you get lunch and a parking spot.
And this will come forward in the future, ball game nights?
We live next to BYU.
Right.
That's going to happen, and that's part of the blessing and the curse. So it's going to happen.
So the sign will say, except ball game days?
No, it's only from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m.
BYU plays football and basketball in the afternoon during those hours.
Okay, so usually, and it's not on Saturdays and Sundays, and if the game starts at 2 o'clock, then they can park there at 2. They're there until 4 o'clock, and they park there for 2 hours. It's valid. It's worked really well for the other places where the program's been in place. And we just understand that, look, on game days, there's even safety is violated in terms of the width of the streets and parking on both sides in the neighborhood. So it's just something that happens. And if we want to take care of that issue, well, that would be really wonderful, but that's not what we're talking about for this evening. Again, it's just to say, can we turn this over to city staff, get them to look at things, come back with you some ideas? And certainly as a neighborhood, we'd like to be involved with the staff while that formulation of a plan and collection of data is put together. We have some of the data already in place. It'll make the city staff's efforts easier.
I think according to code, these are our two choices, at least that's how they're listed. So my question is this, and Brian, maybe you can help, or where it says direct that a study of the proposed parking area be undertaken, what kind of timing or what kind of study do we need to look for, or what kind of time sequence do we need?
If the council chooses to move this forward, then the next part of the code requires that within 120 days after today's action, the city permit parking coordinator shall review the application and submit a report to the mayor and municipal council, which verifies and quantifies the petition signatures, analyzes the proposed parking area in light of the designation criteria contained in the code, and makes a recommendation regarding the boundaries, time restrictions, costs, etc. And then at that point, after receiving that report, the council has 90 days to hold another public hearing to actually consider the details of the proposed permit, and then one more meeting after that to take action and actually approve it.
Okay, so given those time, it's not something that happens very quickly, Paul. We're sorry, but I'm supportive of this moving with this parking permit program. I think the success of the old one in the same basic area with the same consequences and kind of environment, I think, is something that we should move forward and let that study take place.
George?
I make a motion to direct a study of the proposed parking area be undertaken.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we will then call for a vote. Those in favor? That passes unanimously. We'll now move on to item number 4, an ordinance amending Provo City Code to establish amenity requirement for the city for the residential portions of mixed-use developments within the regional shopping center. And Aaron Ardmore will present this to us.
Okay, thank you. So back in January 2017, this council approved an ordinance allowing residential uses in the SC3 zones. Since that time, at that time, the amenity space typically required with a residential project, apartment building, was not included. So there's no amenity requirement for residential in the SC3 zone. So we've brought forward this. Let's see. Oh, can you bring up the Planning Commission slides instead? The Planning Commission slides. Okay. So we brought forward this amendment to just add that to the residential units in SC3. Essentially, we just took the requirement from the medium density residential zone, which is a 10% requirement for units of 20 or more. So 10% of that space needs to be built-in amenity space of the developer's choosing. We did add a third subsection because this could be a horizontal or vertical mixed-use project in the SC3 zone. We added a adjacency criteria, so it would be a usable space for the tenants of the residential project within the SC3 zone. These slides here that have been brought up were asked for earlier in today's study session by the council. So just a few examples of what that amenity space looks like, that 10%, that's been used in downtown as well. So here it's the 63 East Center Apartments. There's their site plan for their amenity space. And does this work? Next slide. Try again. Nothing. That's what it ended up looking like. So they've got a very nice workout space upstairs and downstairs. And next slide. City View Apartments still in construction, getting close to being done. You could see there to the in the center of building, between Building A and Building C, there's a large area, and then again between Building A and Building B. The next slide. And that's what it's proposed to look like. It's getting close. And next slide. Liberty Center, they have 2 courtyards, and they have a pretty large clubhouse. So go to the next slide. That's what that looks like. So these are different ways that developers have used the 10%. We've found that it's worked well for them. It's worked well for the tenants. There hasn't been a lot of pushback from developers on the requirement. So we would just propose that same requirement is included in this residential portion of the SC3 zone. Thank you.
Any questions for Aaron before he steps down? Okay, thank you. This is open for public comment, and we'll invite anyone that would like to speak to this item to come forward now. Seeing no one, we'll bring it back to the council for any further discussion. Mr. Harding.
Aaron, if I could ask you a question, I'm sorry, it took me a moment to formulate the question. I believe I'm aware of development interest in 2 areas that are currently zoned SC3. Are the potential developers, are they aware of this change?
They are. They're constantly in talks with our economic development division, who let them know of these changes, and they have another one coming to you next month, kind of along the same lines. So yeah.
So they are aware and are not opposed.
Yeah, we haven't heard any negative feedback from them.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Dave?
And you do give them flexibility on how to use it.
Sure. Yeah. So specifically in the MDR and HDR, they could do indoor, outdoor completely, one or the other, or a mix of both. Downtown is still a bit different, but here in this application of it, they could choose that, and they could choose whether it be lobby space, study space. I mean, whatever you can think of. It's just got to be usable space for all the residents.
Any other questions? George, you look like you're working on something. Maybe not.
I'm just looking at the zoning map to figure out where these locations are right now.
So there's 4 major SC3 zones in the Provo City. One is the shops at Riverwoods. Then what's become known as the Mix along the Parkway, the mall, and then across the street from the mall was just zoned to SC3, so all of the east side of East Bay, and then a portion of the golf course.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
We got that question. So in the shops at Riverwoods, it has to be actually within the shops at Riverwoods of that zone. We have properties on the outside of the shops at Riverwood.
So north of the shops, there's some residential existing. That's in a different zone.
And if somebody, and same as the south side, it's a different zone?
That's correct.
Okay.
You mean across the street?
Yeah,
across 4800?
across the street
Yep.
to the south. They've already got theirs, and they've already got a
Exactly.
project that has this 10% in there, I'm sure, anyway, so.
You're right.
Any other questions? Okay, then we will. Okay, thank you. Does any council member desire to consider this item again at the next council meeting? This is its first hearing, and so if any council member chooses to move this for one more week for anything that they're concerned about, to study it, we can do that. Seeing none, I'll look for a motion.
Mr. Chair, you have an implied motion. on
Oh,
this
thank
item,
you. I
so.
appreciate that. We do have an implied motion. I call for a second on that? No, don't need to. Okay. Those in favor? This passes unanimously then. Thank you. We'll move to item number 5, an ordinance amending Provo City Code Chapter 14.41, home occupations. Brian Maxfield will address this.
Thank you. This is an item that you've been familiar with since earlier this year. There were different versions, and this version you're looking at tonight, Exhibit A, went to the Planning Commission August 22nd, where they recommended unanimously in favor of approval. The changes are based on 6 different areas. And in the home occupation ordinance or definitions, it adds a definition for customer and employee. And then under the conditions for approval of a minor home occupation, it does increase the hours from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. And then has some other sections. Did you have those up, Bryce, or did you? We can do that. Okay, there are the 2 definitions, and then these next ones are the conditions where it on 3 and 4, where it adds the limits on merchandise. The customers change on that and put in the 12, and then 15 and 16 instances where home occupation includes an accessory apartment. Major home occupations are not allowed unless use of the accessory apartment is terminated. And then 16, sufficient off-street parking must be provided for all business-related vehicles which park at the location of the home occupation, including those of the applicant, employee, customers, clients, and business-related visitor vehicles. The next section on major home occupations, these require conditional use permits. On number 1, it clarifies this a little, but it up to 6 customers per hour may come to a dwelling between the hours of 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. and up to 2 customers per hour between the hours of 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. So it adds those evening hours and clarifies that a little bit. And then on the final section on C, it says a home occupation that does not bring customers to the premise may have extended hours for outside employees from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. And currently, I believe they're restricted to 6 p.m. if I'm not in error there, but.
5 o'clock.
Or is it 5 o'clock? Okay, so 5 o'clock. So it extends that time. And then lastly, on 4, promotional meetings for purpose of selling merchandise, taking orders, or training may exceed the limits on customers and employees in this section, but may not be held more than 4 times per month and shall be limited to a combined total of 12 customers and employees. So this one added that limitation on that amount to 12. Are there any questions on these?
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. This item is open also for public comment. Anyone wishing to comment on this can come forward now.
Hi, my name is Sarah. Can I ask a question that doesn't count towards the 2 minutes?
Yep.
Just really quick, the difference between a major home occupation and a minor home occupation is a little
Would you get with Brian after?
Sure.
That
Okay.
That could take
No
a little
problem.
bit
It
of time.
just take into consideration my comments that I'm not sure I know the definition, so if I did, I might sound dumb. But I am very concerned about this because it's very discriminatory towards people that work from home. So as I'm reading it, somebody who teaches piano lessons or does hairdressing or any of the smaller occupations, sure, we don't want somebody distributing, you know, Amway with 50,000 customers every day coming. No, I get that. We want to protect. But to say that just because somebody makes a living to support their family from home means they cannot rent their basement apartment, that it was legal as an accessory apartment, I think is very, very unfair. And I think that we should stop this immediately. I mean, if you want more definitions to, you know, how many customers or whatever, but I'm reading this and I'm seeing that because I have a duplex, I'm allowed to operate a business, but had I had an accessory apartment, I can't. It's just not fair.
Thank you. We'll come back. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Just make a quick clarification. Minor home occupations continue to be permitted with accessory units. It's just the major home occupations that would be restricted.
And you can explain the difference to her. Thank you.
The difference is on the traffic per hour. I'm Marilee Franson. Good afternoon. And I'm with her. We should strike out the prohibition from a major home occupation and an accessory apartment. And not only am I in opposition of it, 2 of the Planning Commission members opposed it, 2 abstained, and this passed only with 3 votes. 2 of them were hesitant, but they approved it to move on. There were 2 concerns when this was brought back to the Planning Commission. One was that, and it was actually classified by one of the members as a classist. I'm gonna just read my notes here. The Planning Commission discussed concern as to the classist nature of regulation impeding a major home occupation and an accessory apartment. Another commission member discussed how such prohibition seemed too harsh and asked if there were no better solutions to any specific concerns to why this was being done. You also wanted to consider the legal foundation explained by the Ombudsman as to why this is not a good idea. You can read that at length in his discussion, but property law rights, use rights are protected, and we should protect them also with our legislation. The second concern was on mandatory off-street parking for all uses at all times. I want you to be aware that there are already regulations specifying how many parking lots there needs to be, but making such a broad prohibition can have unintended consequences. And it's also too harsh. One of the Planning Commission members said that we shouldn't be too tense or too uptight about the public using a public street. Of course, we need to be careful in planning, and there are already a lot of safeguards as to providing off-street parking for different occupations on the code. So we can rely on those. Plus, the home occupation permit is given on an individual basis. So when the inspector comes, he can take a look. What's the business? What's the size? How many spots do we need? Is there off-street parking? We already pay for that, $1,000 for that. They already come. There's no need to make such a harsh prohibition. You also postponed this and sent it back because you wanted to talk about the childcare impacts. I don't know if you had a chance to get answers to those questions, but I studied that a lot. I'm happy to answer any questions if you want to talk to me. But in summary, considering that during your work session on August 7th, it seemed that you had some concerns about this, and considering that a majority of the Planning Commission members were very concerned, even though it was passed, a majority were concerned, I urge you to make progress and support Mr. Sowell's proposal with the lines that cause no concern, such as redefining client, extending the hours of operation, defining client.
Ask you to wrap up now.
Yes. Yes, thank you. So if we can identify those lines that are of most importance to Mr. Sowell that can help us pass this, but also strike out to those that cause concern because of the impact to the individual rights of the citizens of Provo, I think we could pass careful legislation for the benefit of our city. Thank you.
Sorry, I have no numbers, but I just want to just state that as well as being classist, it's probably really important to recognize that the majority of the people that are providing these services, such as piano teachers and beauticians and that sort of thing, are going to be women. And you want to be really careful that this doesn't turn into a gender discrimination.
Will you state your name for the record?
I'm sorry, it's Maren Hansen. That's all, thank you.
Okay, seeing no one else coming up, we will bring this back to the council for council discussion. Just so the council is aware, this item also qualifies to for any council member to ask for a continuance for one session, so we'll bring it back in at a designated time should anyone desire to do that. Mr. Connect.
Some questions. Brian? So I didn't think anything could pass by 3 votes of the Planning Commission. What was the vote tally? I thought they had to have a quorum of 4 to pass anything.
Yeah, there were a number there. I don't have the report of action in front of me. But the
report says it passed 4-2 with 2 abstentions. So there were 8 present, and it passed 4-2.
Yeah, 4 is a quorum with the Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you. And this will apply to all zones in the city?
Yes, it's a home occupation, which isn't based on a zone.
Right, right. But the reason I guess I mentioned that is not all zones can have accessory apartments.
Correct.
And those zones currently are the A and S overlay, and then also you would find it in the RC zone?
There are some that are grandfathered and different things that way that were permitted at one time to have those that continue.
Right. So, so the way I'm looking at this is if for residential R1 neighborhoods where that's our lowest density and where people buy a home to have what the courts would call the quiet enjoyment of their property, and if it's a single-family neighborhood, an R1 neighborhood, we've seen a lot of discussion or even fights over adding A overlays, because if it doesn't already have the A overlay, some people say, well, gee, I bought into a single-family neighborhood. I don't want to double the density and double the traffic, or just, I don't want it to change. So I would say there's a difference between an R1 neighborhood that has accessories, has that overlay, A or S overlay, and neighborhoods that don't have it. And it's also a difference between what used to be like an R2, maybe it's an LDR, but neighborhoods where duplexes are allowed, because the duplex is a more intensive use that you would not find in a R1 neighborhood. So I look at the overall package of how much impact you're going to be creating in our lowest density neighborhoods. Now, maybe if you're in a zone where you're expecting higher intensity uses, this would not be as big of a deal. And that's kind of why I asked, does it apply everywhere?
If you're in an A1 zone or RA zone, sometime it wouldn't seemingly be as much.
Yeah. So, and then as far as the public streets, for the at least 50 years that I know of, going back to 1968 or before that, we've had an obligation in Provo to provide an off-street parking space for every car that's owned and operated at an address. Now, that doesn't mean you have to park off-street. We don't have an overnight parking ban like some places, at least not citywide. There are certain neighborhoods where that's the case. But yes, if you have a car, you have an obligation to have an off-street place for it, whether you use it or not. And that spills over into if you have employees and other situations where we specify the amount of off-street parking. But that underlying rule really applies to every home, every apartment complex. If you only have so many spaces, you really should not be renting to everyone having a car. If you'll have 50% parking ratio, in theory, 50% of the people that live there shouldn't have a car. Not that it works that way in practice, but that is how it is in theory. So those are just my observations about parking and the zone, and I would be reluctant to pass this tonight. I think it might be smart to have this considered again, but I would ask staff if you would think about whether we want to change it in any way so that it doesn't apply to all zones, because I understand that home occupations are found in every zone, but not accessories.
Anyone else that would like to comment to this? Dave.
I just wanted to point out the list that's on the screen now are uses that are explicitly included as minor home occupations. And so when we're talking about major home occupations, we're talking about home occupations, uses that are more intense than the ones that are listed here. So I think that's important to keep in mind what kind of scope of uses we're talking about.
Mr. Sewell.
A couple other clarifications. I think it's also important to point out the difference in intensity of the customer and employee traffic between a minor and a major home occupation. A minor home occupation can have up to 2 customers per hour and no outside employees. And a major home occupation can have an outside employee and can have up to 6 customer visits per hour. So the part of this proposal that has been mentioned by a couple of residents to prohibit having both an accessory apartment and a major home occupation, I just wanted to clarify that we're talking about a major home occupation and not a minor one in that case. A couple other clarifications as far as the Planning Commission vote. So there were actually two versions of this draft that went to the Planning Commission. There was an earlier one that passed unanimously. I think maybe that was in July. July, yeah, sometime in July, and then the one in August, as was mentioned, there were 4 commissioners that voted in favor, 2 that voted against, and there were 2 abstentions. One of those abstentions I just wanted to point out was by a member who felt they had a conflict of interest because of having a home occupation, so that member didn't participate in the discussion at all. Just wanted to mention that. Another clarification, there was a mention of the ombudsman opinion, and in my opinion, that was in reference to the propriety of whether or not the conditional use permit should have been denied, and I don't believe there was any comment on there as to the propriety of whether the council would pass an ordinance that would prohibit both an accessory apartment and a major home occupation due to the cumulative amount of impact to the neighborhood. The other comment I wanted to make was parts of this proposal, I think, are just intended to clarify some language in the ordinance, like, for example, what a customer means and things like that. Whenever there's any room for ambiguity, you can have good citizens who misinterpret what's allowed, and that can cause problems all around. And we just felt it was important to be really clear so there's no misunderstanding that a customer is not a large group and that kind of thing. And there's a couple of other clarifications in there as well. So those were my comments.
That's a great point, Dave, that a lot of these are just clarifications and minor adjustments, and sometimes they're actually in favor of the existing home occupation. They're not more restrictive. So other than the minor things, what would you classify as the major, if there was a major change here, what would you say it is?
Let's see. So aside from the definitions, so there's just the one significant change, I think, is the prohibition of the accessory apartment and the major home occupation together. There's some tweaks, I would call them, in terms of hours of operation, and maybe that is more than a tweak, because I think the current ordinance is a little ambiguous as to its intent, because it clearly outlines that for a major home occupation that the operating hours should only be between 8 and 5, but it's silent on customer hours. And the way I read it, I felt like the interpretation was, or the intent was, that for the higher impact of a major home occupation, that there should be some limits to daytime hours, and so that's what we tried to incorporate here. And then the idea that there would be no limit at all on customer visit hours didn't make a lot of sense to me. I think maybe that was an oversight. You don't want people visiting home occupation past midnight and things like that. And so we actually looked around at ordinances in 10 different cities, and most of them do have limits on when customers can visit, and in the same general range as what we proposed. So,
thanks.
Dave, how many of those cities also prohibit the dual accessory apartment and major home occupation?
I don't recall seeing that actually in the others. The one other thing I would mention, though, is if you line them all up in terms of the amount of impact on a neighborhood that they allow, Provo was kind of way over at one end in terms of allowing more impact. And so we, like, for example, several of the cities don't allow outside employees at all in any case. Others had lower limits on the number, either the number of customers per hour or per day or things like that. So since we were already kind of far over on this end, one of our objectives was to kind of draw the line a little bit and not keep heading in that direction of allowing more and more impact in our neighborhoods from businesses.
Mr. Harding.
Just a quick comment on that. It's my understanding that most other cities do not allow accessory apartments, period. So to them, I mean, there's no point in barring that.
George.
I think all these changes are very reasonable, and I'm supportive of the impact of the residential neighborhood of a major business, home business, plus accessory apartment is just too great.
Thank you. Okay, Dave.
So I really appreciate your work on this, Dave, and I do believe in protecting R1 single-family neighborhoods, but it kind of gave rise, as from some of the public comments, we have a lot of different zones. We have, like the RC zone, we have places where you might find duplexes and or accessories in the same area, and it may not be an area where you would expect the same I don't know, low impact as a R1 neighborhood. If you're in a downtown neighborhood, let's say. So if it doesn't have an R1 designation, maybe it has a different complexion and expectations. So I don't know if that translates into anything, but I'm just throwing it out there, Brian. And so that's my concern.
Mr. Sewell.
So this proposal, that aspect of the proposal originally came from community development, and I'm open to, if you want to come back with a suggestion along that line of whether you think that should be modified. It'd be as far as the zones that it would apply to, I haven't really thought about that, and would be open to that.
George.
So I'm not sure, am I hearing a reason to delay? Okay. If we're going to do that, I would be interested also in exploring if we need specific language, as has been suggested, about daycare. I don't know if there, some questions have been raised about the hours of daycare and whether daycare deserves and needs a special language about hours that would be separate from other major home occupations. I don't know. I'm just interested to know what research is out there. And I know Mrs. Franson has mentioned some of that, and I think you had somebody speak at a previous meeting about that. I'm just curious about that, if that's something we can, I presume that could be done separately from this anyway, but if we're going to go back and look at it a little bit more, maybe we could investigate that.
Okay, having a council member that is interested in continuing this item, this ordinance will then be scheduled for the next city council meeting, which will be, Cliff, help me, what's the date on that? September 25th. And so this will be on the agenda item for September 25th. We'll move now on to item number 6, a resolution authorizing the mayor to approve a second amendment interlocal corporation agreement with Utah County regarding a highway project known as the West Side Connector. And
Mr. Chair, I don't know if anyone else from Public Works is here, but Dave Graves told me as he left work session that he wasn't going to be able to be here tonight, and asked if I could take charge of this.
Thank you very much.
So I agreed to do that. This was presented on in your work session today. It's a fairly simple issue where there's already an interlocal cooperation agreement between Utah County and Provo City that governs the reimbursement for and where the money comes from for reimbursing the city for construction costs associated with the West Side Connector. And Utah County has proposed that we amend that section and make a relatively simple change, which leaves the overall total amount the same, but removes a reference to a portion, to $500,000 of that reimbursement needing to come from vehicle registration fees. And the county has just asked, as I understand, the county has just asked to do that in order to give them a little bit more flexibility about where they get that reimbursement money from. But it doesn't change the reimbursement that the city is entitled to or any of the other details of the agreement.
Is there any questions for Mr. Jones? We have discussed this in our work session earlier today. This item is open for public comment. Does anyone wish to comment to this? Okay, seeing no comment, we will bring it back to council for any discussion, and we do have an implied motion. Seeing no comment from council, I will call for a vote on the implied motion. Those in favor? Thank you very much. That passes unanimously. And we will now adjourn by unanimous consent. Thank you for being here.
There are not any other changes that I'm aware of right now in the program, but Tammy Harris is going to be doing the invocation, and then James will be doing another patriotic medley. Bill will be doing the scripture reading. Paul will do the introduction for our mayor's speech, and then again James, and then Peter. I haven't seen Peter yet. Peter, are you here? We may be having a change there, but having the benediction. So we'll proceed from here.
Our dear Father in heaven, we're so very grateful for all that thou hast blessed us with. We're thankful to be able to be here at this time, to pray together, to be inspired by Mayor Kafusi, and we ask thee to please be with her in her remarks and in her challenges that she